there's a huge green skills gap where there's more jobs requiring green skills and a lack of talent. But in order to get that skill, you actually already needed to get the job. And so there was nothing bridging that gap.
One person is not going to be able to solve all the challenges that come with climate change. It's going to take thousands, if not millions of people to be solving the challenges that we face today, but also over the next century or more. And that's where Neil Yeoh and his team at OnePointFive come into play. At OnePointFive, they connect and develop climate experts in residence. And they do this in two different ways. One is through an agency where they effectively act as fractional climate experts. So just like you would have a fractional climate or CFO or fractional CTO, they act as a fractional climate expert for companies. And then also they develop these climate experts through what they call the OnePointFive Academy, a accelerator program for those that are aspiring to be climate experts, but maybe don't have the expertise just yet, or maybe they need to tweak their skill set to fit more of climate expertise. In just a few years of doing this agency model and this academy, OnePointFive has now 7 figures in revenue. They did $1.1 million in annual revenue last year. So what I want to do in this video is go over how they've been able to do this in just a few short years. To do that though, let's actually dive into Neil's story a little bit in his background and then go through the strategies and everything that's going on with OnePointFive. So let's start with Neil's little bit of a life journey. So Neil started his career in 2010. And in 2010, he was based in Australia and he was graduating university from the University of Adelaide in Australia. And from there, he actually got a degree, which is, I feel like, pretty unique in robotics and business. So it's a pretty, like liberal arts degree in a lot of ways, where he's got this, this tech background, but also a little bit of the business background. So in terms of being like, are you a tech co-founder? Are you a business co-founder? Neil's kind of got both. So he does this in 2010 and he jumps immediately into consulting. And he's doing the typical consulting journey. He's done KPMG, I believe it is where he was. And he was there for a few short years, worked there quite a bit. And then from there, he went into an MBA program at this little place called Oxford. And in Oxford, he got his MBA and he's starting to think more about sustainability and things like that, or at least it seemed like it. And he joins a company, an organization called Echoing Green. This is all kind of happening in a few short years. So this happened from 2015 to 2016. And then this is about, 2010 is here. And then you can see about 5 years in consulting. Now, Echoing Green, this was 2016 to 2019. Echoing Green is essentially a nonprofit that helps develop social impact makers or ones that are maybe aspiring to and giving them projects and different funds and all sorts of things. It's a lot of different things. But the thing that Neil did here was actually manage an $8.5 million fund with recoverable grants for climate projects. Now, the recoverable grants were pretty interesting because these grants they're going to startups and projects and things like that for climate projects and helping to solve the climate challenges all across the world. But they're grants, and then essentially, right, is if you have the ability as the company or the project to then pay that back, you would be expected to do that. And so when talking to Neil, he said about like half of these grants actually came back and helped extend the fund, which was a pretty interesting little tidbit if you're into grants and things like that and grant development. That was a pretty interesting development of like how they structured that. But he does this, right, and he sees about 3,000 companies apply, or at least talk through, or kind of submit their grant proposals through this, fund. 3,000 companies, I'll just say projects because they might not be companies, but they submit through this, right? And they essentially fund about 30 of them from what I can tell. So they do these some companies, and Neil is seeing a lot of different things in these few short years. But one of the things in talking to Neil that he mentioned though is like, right, the money is super helpful, but the money doesn't solve all of your problems, right? There's a lot to this. Like, right, there's this like communications piece. There's actually like the legality piece of things. If I can I draw the White House? No, I can't. Anyways, so you have, right, all these different people in organizations and things are happening for climate that one person or even just that money can't just solve all by itself. There's a lot of different pieces to it. So he does this, Echoing Green, he's managing these funds, he's seeing the different problems that come with just like handing people checks. So Neil ends his time at Echoing Green in 2019, and in 2019, he joins another university, a small little one called Yale. And at Yale, he gets his master's of environmental management. And this is to go understand what's actually happening in climate, and is there work that is being done at Yale to maybe help solve these challenges that he was seeing in Echoing Green also there. So he does this, and he has maybe some similar thoughts that are happy that he had at Echoing Green of like, actually, this is still, you need a lot of different people, and there's a lot of more systems changes rather than let's just throw people or money at things. There's a lot of different things that need to happen. So because of that, he goes into 2020 with this mindset of like, okay, like maybe I actually need to start a venture. And as Neil put it, he's an accidental entrepreneur. He wasn't aiming to be an entrepreneur, at least originally in his career. And now he's like, actually, let's do this because this is actually, we need to be building a venture that actually solves this problem. So that's why in 2020, in February of 2020, he starts a company called OnePointFive. And OnePointFive originally was going to be a marketplace for climate experts and companies to be able to connect and find. So like you can think of it as like the Fiverr for climate experts. But instead of me describing it, let's actually have Neil describe it himself.
We founded OnePointFive initially as a marketplace for climate experts and to execute on projects, but to fundamentally provide fractional capacity and expertise to drive forward climate solution.
Okay, why start with a marketplace, especially since like those traditionally have been the hardest startups to build? Like two-sided marketplaces are like almost impossible to build. So like, why start there?
Ignorance. To be honest, was a first-time founder. If I knew marketplaces, which are actually three businesses in one, you have the demand, the supply, and the matching, I may not have started it. But I think that's the beauty of just getting started. As you hear from many other founders, is that ignorance can be bliss, because at the end of the day, you need to just prototype, try something, learn quickly, and then iterate. So we started off with the concept that we needed a Fiverr of climate. And that was my hypothesis, which still holds true 4 years later, which is we need to figure out a way to better match capacity and expertise to bespoke climate solutions or climate needs for us to make any definitive change.
So Neil starts this marketplace. He has a founding partner, Matthias, and they're doing this marketplace and realizing really quickly that this isn't going to pay the bills out of the gate. This is going to take a little bit of time to get it going. And Neil reluctantly ends up building an agency or consultancy that he didn't want to build because, as he put it, he's a recovered consultant. So they end up doing these consulting projects just to pay the bills. So that ends up working pretty well. And then just by doing these consulting projects in their first year of existing, so in 2020, there's a giant pandemic, they did $100K in revenue just from this. And Neil said that like about 40% of this was just profit. So they ended up turning this like about 40K-ish into like an emergency fund for them as well. So this kind of gave them the bandwidth and just kind of take the next 6 months, or just give them a little bit of wiggle room to see, okay, we have a safety net to kind of go from this after graduation and feel relatively comfortable, but not too comfortable because this isn't a giant pot of money, especially for salaries and living in New York City. So that's year one. Let's talk about the future years then of revenue while we're at it. So you can see, right, 100K in year one, pretty impressive. They did 250K in year two. And then in year three, they did 450K of revenue. So this is growing pretty solidly and things are just kind of steadily going. And then in year four, they make a really big jump to $1.1 million in revenue. Pretty wild how they did this. But this isn't the original vision for 1.5, what they were aiming to do. 99% of this revenue is from consulting projects. Consulting, and or at least maybe it's not the marketplace is maybe the better way to put it. And this is what they really thought was the grand vision and the thing that was actually going to solve the problem. So there's a really interesting dynamic here of like, what do we do if the thing that we wanted to do isn't actually working, but the thing that's making the money is working? So let's talk about year three in particular, because this is when they start really realizing that this marketplace isn't really working. So year three, they ended up hiring someone to actually spend some time and working with their expert network, the piece that it's actually the people that would be doing the projects, the experts, people that you would hire maybe on like a Fiverr. They ended up having a really strong network from that, and they ended up hiring someone to help manage that. And with that, they immediately put out a survey to their network to see what was happening, get the information that they needed to see, like, who are you? Like, because they had a little bit of knowledge, but like they wanted to understand what's going on. And between this, but also noticing like where their time was going. So Neil said that 50% of their time was actually going towards educating this network. And this might be like, hey, this is like different areas, or it's going to be like, here's the the legislation. As Neil put it, right, the climate and everything that's happening it's changing really fast. And if you're not actually in it, it's really hard to not just be like on the sidelines and watching, understanding what's all happening, because legislation is changing, the projects are different types of projects, the different technologies are changing. Everything is changing really quickly. So if you're not actually in the work and not actually doing this really actively, it's hard to know and stay up to date. But also climate, it's a really broad subject matter as well. So with all these different dynamics, Neil and his team at OnePointFive, they were spending a ton of their time just educating the network. The other tidbit that Neil pointed out to me was that when they would post internships, so if they would post internships, they would get hundreds of applications just for these for these internships. And the interesting piece in all of this, right, is that OnePointFive, they have a bigger following now, which we'll get into in this video in a little bit, but they don't have this giant following. They don't have this giant email list. They just have like their personal networks mostly at this stage. So to get hundreds of applications for their internships, that they're paid, but that's a crazy number to see. So between their survey data, the 50% of time, and their internships, Matthias and Neil go to the whiteboard and end up realizing that they should create what they call now the OnePointFive Academy. And it was just a landing page, simple, like, hey, here's what it is, right? Maybe it looked like this, and it was like, put your email down, and like we'll just simply apply. Almost overnight, or at least like within a week or two, from what I can tell talking to Neil, is they had hundreds of applications just for this academy, and they had about 300 applicants pretty quickly just for this academy. And then that turned into 90 participants paying quite a bit, because this OnePointFive Academy today, it's about $2,000, but if with scholarships, things like that they were doing, they still do those things today, I would estimate this is about $100,000 in revenue just off cohort 1. That's crazy. So they did 100K, and they're like, okay, clearly OnePointFive Academy, this is the thing that's actually working, and we need to spend more time here. So that's what they've been doing the last few years. And now just this year in 2024, they have now they're in cohort 6 right now, but cohort 5 has 184 participants in it. And this, if you can estimate, maybe it's $1,000 to $2,000, is probably roughly $200K in revenue just off of one 6-week program. That's wild. So when you think of the amount of revenue compared to what they're doing, so for 2024, they're estimated about $2 million in annual revenue. That's about 10% of their revenue. If I can do math, yeah, it's 10% is in this one 6-week course is based off of this academy. So now they have in OnePointFive, right? They have the agency, which is working really well. That's the one part of it. And then they have the academy, which is the other part. So it's kind of this nice blend between a B2B model here and then a B2C model. And these two, right, they feel like very different businesses, but as we'll talk about in a little bit here in their growth strategies, these actually kind of feed one another in a really nice way. So with all of that, let's actually jump into the growth strategies, the 3 main ones I would say that OnePointFive has been using to grow into this $2 million company in 2024. So that's the high level story of OnePointFive. Well, let's actually go into the 3 main growth strategies that OnePointFive has been using to grow into a $2 million company. So the first one I would say is personal networks. And personal networks is mostly from the past jobs and experiences that Neil and Matthias have been having before they even joined into Yale or even started OnePointFive. And they have a few different ones. They have the Yale network, which has a lot of good climate people in it. They have the Echoing Green one. And then also from Matthias, he also worked at a startup called Cambion Carbon that has very much in the climate industry. So between, I think, all 3 of these, they have a really, between the two of them, they have a very strong personal brand within climate, which has then been able to open doors. But let's actually have Neil himself describe how the personal networks have been helping to grow 1.5.
We had no problem finding supply of people who wanted to be experts or were experts who wanted to actually work on work. And that came from my own personal network. By that time, I'd already been in industry for a while. And obviously through the Yale network in environmental management, people at least understood, okay, there's a person here who's legitimate in the field. Even if I don't know what they're doing, I'd be willing to apply for it. The problem was the demand side, right? And a lot of the projects, and still a lot of the projects, started off from my personal network. They're still very much on referrals, the fact that I did good work. But part and parcel of why it was tricky at the earlier stages was that, just like with any startup, the thing I didn't anticipate was we just didn't have brands. In the beginning years, honestly, it was me who was holding up the business as the face of the business, but now over 4 years has evolved into a trusted business where a lot more clients are willing to ask us to do projects.
Okay, so that's Neil's take on his personal network. But one thing I want to point out here actually is that they were actually able to expand their personal networks through these networks as well, because they've been able to turn these into speaking and collaboration opportunities. So what they've been able to do, right, and they seem subtle, but I actually think these are really, they're big, because within this, right, they've been able to become like speakers and writers and contributors for things like the World Economic Forum and Forbes. So Economic Forum and Forbes, and they've been able to do this, right, because they have these backgrounds that give them legitimacy. But then you get these when they are contributing at the World Economic Forum and Forbes, they can put this, Neil especially can put this little thing of like CEO of 1.5, which seems, again, subtle. It seems like a small little thing. But if you continually are writing content or contributing and speaking at places that have big logos, that's going to give not only Neil and Matthias really strong, these backings of like, hey, the people that the world really trusts is backing up this new organization and these two people. But the more you see it, the more it's like, oh, they're actually legit. So when Neil maybe posted like, hey, I actually wrote another article for Forbes or things like that, that really helps give them credibility, which then helps them get more clients and do those things, especially if they're doing high-level climate work. That just kind of helps them kind of spin up of like, hey, we're legit, we're not going anywhere, all that kind of stuff. So personal networks is how they got started, especially in that, like, I would say year 1, year 2 to get started. Growth strategy number 2 is LinkedIn. And actually LinkedIn, according to Neil, is now their biggest driver for 1.5. And it's been pretty interesting in a few different ways. So in 2020, from what Neil told me, they had about 1,000 followers on the 1.5 page. And this is just on the 1.5 like company page. Now in 2024, they have 10,000 followers. And you might be thinking, okay, like that doesn't seem like a big jump. Like it's definitely growth, but it doesn't seem massive. But let me give you some context, right? So 10,000 followers in a B2B setting, and this could be LinkedIn, this could be YouTube where you're watching this, is actually a pretty massive number. And that because you're looking for a smaller amount of clients, not just like looking for millions of people to buy your product, you're looking for maybe like 10 to 100. So if you think of that, right? So even if they get 10 clients, in their agency or their consultancy here and for 1.5, let's say a project is worth to them maybe 20K. 10 times 20 is 200K in revenue. So this is a really big deal to get, 10 to 10,000, right? That's the 1% whatever. And that's a big deal because, right, 10 clients, 20K each, that's a pretty big number. And I'm probably being conservative with 10 clients and 20K. These numbers are really easy to get to, and 10K is, again, a big deal because you're looking for a small amount of clients with high ticket pricings. The other thing that Neil mentioned here is that it's actually helping their academy as well, because LinkedIn is where people go for a job, right? So if you're looking for opportunities or maybe to pivot your career, LinkedIn's going to be probably place number 1 that you go to. So because of that, right, that helps the academy and people, doing that. And as we mentioned earlier in the video, right, they were already getting hundreds of applications for their internships. The academy is kind of just another piece of that, and actually it's funneling people to the right place rather than just to internships, where maybe they pick like what, 2-3 people. So it's very interesting that they're actually getting a lot of clients and actually people through the 1.5 Academy through LinkedIn. The other thing I want to mention here, though, that I think if I had to bet, I have no data, but I think if I had to bet, is that Neil himself, right, has become a LinkedIn creator himself. And now he has about 14,000 followers himself on LinkedIn. And people tend to buy from people. So what I would guess is that their LinkedIn page, so the 1.5 page, this probably gives them more legitimacy with the B2B clients. And this is driving, right, the 10K to then the 20K, 10K followers to those 20K clients that we're kind of talking about. But my guess would be Neil himself, or Matthias even too, is with his 14,000 followers, this is probably driving more to the academy because, again, people buy from people typically. And this is more of like the B2C play. And this is more of the B2B, right? So I think this fits pretty nicely. And these, we'll blend them in a second. But these two fit in terms of, like, if I had to bet that most of the people that are trying for academy are following Neil, and maybe clients and projects are coming through the 1.5 page. And I'm sure projects, and this is probably going both ways a little bit, but if I had to guess, this would be the way I would probably bet that this is working. The final growth strategy I want to talk about is maybe not necessarily intuitive or doesn't make any sense, but that is networks and subnetworks. And you're like, aren't these just the same thing? And I'm going to argue no. And this is how 1.5 becomes one business rather than like the two separate ones we've kind of been talking through the entire video. They have, right, the consultancy, but also the academy. But really, these are the same business. They work together. But let me actually have Neil himself explain kind of this flywheel that they've created between the academy and the consultancy.
Our future business model is all our experts are graduates of our academy. And we now, I can say, by next month, we'll have over 700 from 45 countries, all credentialed and trained in our programming, of which amplify our work. And we're increasing that by probably at least a couple hundred each quarter-ish, depending on how much we grow. And so this is phenomenal how it can happen. And then our flywheel is if we upskill talent, we can then mobilize a workforce that then can embed sustainability, do the work. That then leads to sharing your insights, that then leads to upskilling again. And it fits really well for both our B2B business and our B2C business. And I would confidently say after really grappling with this for the last 6 months, we're still being able to show that overlap where sometimes people are like, aren't you building two businesses? And we found a way to bring that flywheel together.
There's a lot there from Neil. So let's explain this flywheel and how the academy and the consultancy are connected. So let's start with the academy. So you have 1.5 Academy, right? And that, just like we talked about in the Terry Rice video, if you didn't see that, right, is that actually builds trust and expertise. Right? And that's a big deal for getting people to pay you for things. But because you're teaching and you're doing these things, but then also, right, people are learning if you're doing things right eventually, right? Is that with that, right, you get more climate experts that 1.5 is creating or developing. And so these are happening. And then maybe they work for 1.5 with consulting projects, things like that. But more than likely, they are going to join another organization. And they're going to be maybe a full-time, expert, or maybe they have their own projects, whatever it might be. They're going to get other organizations and opportunities because of their learning from 1.5 Academy. And they're going to have, right, this like really good experience, just like you'd go to like a school or a college, right? There's like hey, I learned this. I really they became a big foundation for me, right? You kind of want to give back or things like that, right? You stay connected at least and aware of what's going on. But they join organizations and opportunities in those organizations that they're already paying someone to be doing this work, right? More than likely, this person isn't probably going to be able to maybe do all the work, or they're going to get more opportunities and grow what they're doing. And because of that, there's a good chance that they're going to need a fractional expert in climate to help them do their work. And as you can see, 1.5 Academy or 1.5 consultancy is going to be able to go grab some of these projects because it's a natural ask to be like, hey, you're actually the experts, and two, like, I'm an expert, but you have this network of experts. Let me actually go back to you and help fill the gaps or whatever it might be. So then they're able to get more money from these organizations, and the people that are in the 1.5 Academy are actually kind of becoming not affiliates, but they're helping to build a network that's out in the world doing climate work. And so you're getting paid here, right? So this might be, that's $1,000, $1 to $2K that they get here. But here, right, is they might be getting a 30 grand check here. And the more you do consulting projects, the more, right, people are going to know you, what you're doing. They're going to have more brand legitimacy, because especially if you're working with Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies, whatever it might be, that's going to build more legitimacy. And then this legitimacy sends kind of more people to the 1.5 Academy. So you kind of build this flywheel that is where you have the academy, but you have a consultancy, and these two help spin one another together to give it credibility and trust, but also to help find more projects and expand the web of a network. So with this flywheel, right, you can see there's a network that, 1.5, I would say, stewards, right? And that is they're experts, and they have, right, their own projects, consultants, whatever it might be, right? They have their trusted network that they can tap into. But with the academy, which is really unique, and trying to get people into organizations, and maybe organizations that aren't even connected to the 1.5 consultancy, right? They have this person, right, that they're teaching, and they're creating community within this. And these people all have communities, they have this community that they're building here in the academy, and they're going to lead into experts, things like that. But also, right, with them going into organizations, you're going to get this networking effect that they actually go out in the world, are not only are they going to go create impact and things like that, but because, right, just like you would be like your alma mater and be like, hey, I'm from Hope College or University of Michigan State, whatever, Yale University, whatever it might be, right? You're going to go tell people like, hey, here's how I got into this, or I can go tap into people with 1.5, things like that. That is a natural thing to go do. And because of that, right, you get these sub networks from the people that are going through the academy and are going to help fill the gaps of these different organizations and things like that. And this is going to naturally build out, because the more people you teach, the more people, and especially if you're doing teaching really well, the more the word's going to spread, and you're creating this network effect, which you have here, and you're within here as well. But also you have these sub networks that are going to be able to grow into the 1.5 community and their business model and all that comes with it. So it's a really cool business model. It took them a minute to get it going, but it's a really interesting thing to have a B2B play and a B2C, which then feeds one another in a pretty interesting flywheel. If you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more content like this, check out the newsletter in the description below.